Kajuntef, everybody. Good to be with you. I'm glad that you have made this session part of your day's observances to help stir our contemplation, our exploration of big ideas, and the important process of tshuva as individuals and as a community. We're going to do a little bit of learning together this morning of some sacred text that will help us explore these ideas of sacred belonging, diversity, and inclusion. To begin, I want to remind you of something Freddie said at the beginning of our session that was very important. She said, belonging means that you are home. I think that's an important understanding of what that word means in everyday speech, but in Judaism, being at home is a very important and I'd say central, indispensable Jewish value, that our stories are all filled with the search for home. Every time we talk about our relationship to the land or the people or the words, it's all about an exploration about where it is we can make it possible for ourselves to feel home, to feel at home. And conversely, the work that we're doing today together on this session and beyond it is to see what we can do to help make our spiritual home as inclusive as possible. So we're going to look at a couple of different texts that explore ideas of diversity and inclusion in sacred text. One of the things that I talked about last night in my remarks was that just about any issue we can consider as modern people will have lots of different arguments and lots of different texts to bolster different perspectives on that idea. And the subject of diversity and inclusion is no different. All of our sacred texts from the very beginning of Jewish history until the modern era have taken as granted the fact that we live in a diverse world, that there are people who look different from us, who speak differently, speak different languages, different racial extractions, different ages, different sorts of ability. And so we tried to understand and make sense of the world's natural diversity in sacred text. So the one that we're first going to begin with this morning comes from the book of Genesis. Genesis 11 talks about a familiar story of the Tower of Babel. And here's what the text says. Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And they said, "Come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for ourselves, or else we shall be scattered all over the world." God came down to look at the city and the tower that they had built, and God said, "If, as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. I will confound the human words down there so that they shall not understand one another's speech." That's why it was called Babel, because then God confounded their speech, and from there God scattered them over the face of the whole earth. So something missing here in the translation is the sort of Hebrew play on words, that the tower and the place was called Babel, because after that episode, God made all of their language sound like God confused people's languages so that they couldn't be able to talk to each other anymore. So the story of the Tower of Babel, again, comes with its starting point and the understanding that there is diversity in human culture, diversity in human language. Today, if you travel from one part of the earth to the other, you may not be able to understand what people are saying in the streets or in the shops. And the author of this biblical piece understood that that diversity was engineered by God as a punishment. That God was worried about what would happen in a world where everybody was too much the same, and so God changed people's languages to keep them in check, to prevent the people from being able to overtake God's authority or to get out of line and be insubordinate. So God punished them with diversity of language. Kind of a provocative and interesting starting point. Let's move to our next text, which is a Talmudic text that comes from a section of the Talmud called Sanhedrin that deals with courts and courtrooms and Jewish jurisprudence, which are two words I can never say next to each other. It was taught, Rabbi Meir said, one person is different from another in three ways: in voice, in appearance, and in thought. The difference is in voice and appearance because of marital infidelity. The difference is in thought because of robbery and theft. We need to do a little bit of unpacking of this text to understand what Rabbi Meir is saying. So just like the Tower of Babel story, Rabbi Meir comes to the stage understanding that people are different. We look different, we think different, and we talk different. So why would that be? Rabbi Meir's hypothesis is that God created diversity as a sort of necessary evil. In this text, being different from each other doesn't have a moral valence the way it did in the Tower of Babel story, in which diversity was created as a brake on human beings' ambitions. But in this sense, diversity is a necessary evil. Rabbi Meir proposes. The reason that diversity exists is to prevent adultery and theft. So we need to understand the way Rabbi Meir is thinking. So the context that will make this text comprehensible is this. People look different from each other, God reasons, according to Rabbi Meir's logic, because if everybody looked alike, you might take someone else's spouse home thinking they were yours. And so in order to prevent that kind of accidental adultery, God made people look differently, so you wouldn't accidentally take someone else's spouse home and behave with them as if they were your spouse. Similarly, God made people think differently because of robbery and theft. What's Rabbi Meir suggesting here? First of all, that we want to make sure we don't steal other people's ideas. We want to protect the rights of intellectual property, and if everybody has the same ideas, I might publish someone else's ideas and get credit and royalties for that book, even though the thoughts don't belong to me. But similarly, if we all have the same ideas, we're all going to like the same kind of clothes, we're all going to drive the same kind of car, our houses will look the same, and it would be very easy for me to take my key and take someone else's car to somebody else's house and live in their house thinking that it's mine. So Rabbi Meir suggests that everybody's thoughts and tastes were made different to make sure that we could prevent accidental adultery, robbery, and theft. Still in these texts, diversity exists, but it probably would be better if it didn't have to. In our third text, another rabbinic text, also from the same section of the rabbinic canon called Sanhedrin. This now is from the Mishnah, so it's a little bit earlier, was written a little bit earlier than the last text we just saw. Here's what the text of the Mishnah says. Some of this may sound familiar to you. Adam, the first human, was created alone in order to teach that anyone who destroys one soul in Israel is considered to have destroyed an entire world. Conversely, anyone who saves one soul in Israel is considered to have saved an entire world. Let me just pause here for 1 second. This line is quoted very often as a sort of touchstone text about how important life is in Jewish culture, that it's so important that saving one person's life is tantamount to saving the entire world. We can see in the actual text here a little bit of that tension that I talked about between universalism and particularism. Because what the original text says is not anyone who saves anyone else's life. It says anyone who saves another life in Israel is seen as though they save an entire world. So it's a little bit less touchy-feely universalist than we might like to imagine it is. The rabbis are primarily concerned with the preservation of Jewish life. But it goes on. There's another reason that Adam was created alone, for the purpose of maintaining peace among people, so that one person might not say to another, "My father is greater than yours." This also serves to testify to the greatness of the Holy One. For when a person stamps several coins with one die, they are all similar to each other. But the supreme ruler of rulers, the Holy One of blessing, stamped all people with the seal of the first human, as all of them are his offspring, and none of them is similar to another. Therefore, since all of humanity descends from one person, every single person may say, "The world was created for me." Now we start to see a pivot in the way Jewish thought feels about diversity. Now there is a really lovely appreciation for the fact that there is diversity and variety in human life. The last slide that we saw, you'll remember, said that there's a moral reason for creating diversity, and that is that there shouldn't be sort of clan wars among human beings. There shouldn't be rivalry among people because of what their genealogy looks like or what their last name is or what family they're descended from. Because ultimately, the rabbis reason, we all came from the same great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. We're all relatives, and so it doesn't make any sense to say I deserve more respect because of what my last name is. But now there's also this other thing here on this slide. Let's go back forward to the next one if we could. That whereas Genesis might have suggested that the Tower of Babel story might have suggested that diversity was created as a way to punish or keep people in their place. Here instead, the rabbis are suggesting that diversity is a way of God demonstrating what an amazing craftsperson God is. Because there's no person on earth who can make this sort of merchandise the way that God makes. We all have the same die, they're imagining this sort of process of stamping coins out of a die. The original die is Adam, the first man, and every person that's stamped out of that same die looks different. Imagine going to a factory where they're using the same mold to cast products, but every product that comes out of the same mold looks different. The reason for this text is to suggest that part of God's greatness is that only God can create a mold from which different products emerge. So now the Jewish understanding of diversity takes on a little bit more dimension and color. Diversity demonstrates to us how great and powerful God is, and it also helps engineer an appreciation for egalitarianism in human society, because all of us come ultimately from the same Father. This next text that we're going to look at comes from Harav Kook, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. Rabbi Kook was born in the 19th century, died in the 20th century. This work that we're looking at, called Olat HaRa'ayah, this is Rabbi Kook's commentary on the prayer book, on the Siddur. And here he says something that is really captivating and fascinating about the construction of the Holy Temple, which in the classic Orthodox prayer book is referred to quite a lot, the construction of the Holy Temple. So here is what Rabbi Kook says about the construction of the temple. Just as the Holy Temple was built from different components, the truth of God, who is the light of the world, is composed from different perspectives, through which all divergent opinions become clear. For all of them are the words of the living God, despite our different approaches to prayer and study. And in this sense, all of the perspectives are aligned and do not contradict each other. For the diversity of our opinions comes from the diversity of our souls. Indeed, it enriches wisdom and causes its expansion, which affirms that it is only possible for the building of peace, that's the temple, for the building of peace to be constructed by combining a number of diverse elements that at first glance appear to oppose one another. So let's go back a slide to just remember what we're talking about. Just as the Holy Temple is built from different components, if you spend any time reading the book of Leviticus or parts of Exodus that talk about the construction of ancient Israel's worship spaces, you know that those construction projects included lots of different elements. There's wood and there's precious metal, there are valuable stones, there's silk, all kinds of different things that go in together to create a holy worship space. So Rabbi Kook is saying every time you read or imagine the construction of a holy place where Jews gather to pray, you should remember that the reflection of all those different elements in here too. Look around us. Think about the bricks and the wood, the fabric arts and the glass. All of these different elements come together to remind us of an appreciation of human diversity. And just as the space couldn't be what it is with all of those different resources, with all of their different original sources, in the same way, all of our different ideas and opinions are critical to create a community of prayer, of holiness and wholeness. It enriches wisdom, he says, and causes its expansion. All of us bring something different to our sacred community, but without what each of us brings, this place couldn't be as deep and profound as it is, which affirms that it is only possible for the building of peace to be constructed by combining a number of diverse elements that at first glance appear to oppose one another. We might think that genders stand in opposition to each other, or races stand in opposition to each other. But they're not opposing forces, he says, they're complementary forces. Just like the wood of the building complements the bricks, the thing that one person brings in their ideas and minds and spirit complements what you bring in yours. All right, and lastly, let's go to our final text here. And you can start to see now how the idea that we started with from the Tower of Babel about diversity being a punishment has started to change and be refined and evolved over the centuries of Jewish study and reflection. All right, we have now a text from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a midrashic collection of sort of fanciful, imaginative rabbinic stories about stories in the Torah. And here, the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is talking about the creation of Adam. You'll remember we heard that just a few minutes ago when we talked about how Adam was made alone, that the essential part of Adam's creation was that he was a solitary creation, so that there shouldn't be any wonder about who descended from whom. Here, the Midrash is focusing on a different part of Adam's creation, and that is the Torah's account of how humanity was created out of dust that God gathered from the ground. God gathered the dust to create Adam from the four corners of the earth: red, black, white, and green. Why from the four corners of the earth? So that if one travels from east to west and comes to the end of his life, no one can say to him as he prepares to depart from the world, "Your body is not made from the dust of this land, as mine is. Go back to where you were created." Rather, every place that a person goes contains the dust from which they were created and to which they will return. The reason that Adam was created the way that he was, with dust gathered from different parts of the earth, is that not only is the diversity of the human family traced back to one single ancestor, but the converse is also true, that the diversity of the earth is reflective of the diversity of one individual person. So that anywhere we go, we should be able to feel at home. If the great Jewish spiritual quest of our lives is to find a place where we can come home and feel at home, that has to be reflected in the way that we relate to each other and the way that we relate to the earth in which we live. Finally, the sort of second to last line of this midrash provides us a beautiful and powerful rejoinder that all of us should keep in our pocket the next time we hear a racist say to somebody, "Go back where you came from." What the midrash says is that you can't tell anyone to go back where they came from because all of us came from here. We're all from here. All of us are made out of the same stuff. Just as the world is diverse, that diversity is reflected in the faces of all people. No one can ever tell another person to go back where they came from. That's why God created humanity the way that God did, because all of us came from the same place, and all of us are returning to the same place as well. So I need to wrap up, but what we've seen, just to recap, over the last several slides, over the last few snapshots of Jewish text, is an evolving and changing appreciation and understanding of human diversity in the world. All of them start with the recognition that there is diversity in the world. None of them pretend to believe that all there is Jewish life and all there are Jews, but that people look differently than we do, even within the Jewish community, of course. Jews look all sorts of different ways and come from all sorts of different backgrounds. But we've changed from understanding human diversity as a punishment to a necessary evil to finally, in the end, a real great blessing that helps us appreciate the breadth and depth of what God is and what God is capable of, and also a reminder of us to stay humble, because all of us came from the same ancestor and all of us are made of dust. So as we continue to move now into our program with a piece of music, I thank you for being here. I thank you for your reflection, and I thank you for joining me and joining us on this journey to a deeper understanding of what it means to belong, what it means to make this sacred space a place where everyone is at home. Good Yom Tov, everyone.